Okay, so about bees. Let's see. Most native bee species are in arid lands, so we in the West are the epicenter of native bees for the US. So how many species in the world, in the US? Let's see. The world, about 20,000 different species. The US, about 4,000. California leads the nation with 1,600. Arizona's second with 1,300. Utah's third with 1,100. Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument, all by itself, has 650 species. If you look at the US, oops, that isn't showing up. Is the this?
There it is. It was there. One more time.
There you go. Got it.
Yeah. Whatever you see on your screen is on the screen line.
Oh, good. Okay. So everything east of the Mississippi, you know, those original 13 states plus Florida, are just 770 species. Whereas that little dot, little orange dot, which Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument, is 650, which is pretty amazing. The name Project 1100 comes about because I was working with Grand Canyon Trust when I started this project, and Utah has 1,100 native species of bees. And the Colorado Plateau, if you average those 4 states, it's about 1,100. And they come in all kinds of groups. Obviously, you can't identify most species. A lot of them are small. But there is this group that I'm showing, the mining bees and mason bees and digger bees, mallow and cactus bees. Oftentimes, once you learn these kinds of main groups, you can kind of tell at least what group they're in, and it's pretty interesting. They have different behavior patterns. They live in different places, and they're fun to get to know. And of course, the key thing is that for a flower that wants its pollen to reach the female part, the stigma of another plant in their same species, they need to not just dump it, because what are the chances they're going to hit that same species? They use pollinators, prime among them bees, but clearly also hummingbirds and some wasps and some flies and so on. But the bee is almost like their mail delivery person, you know, both M-A-I-L and M-A-L-E, and can see that rare plant that's the same. If it's a specialist bee that wants to go to that same plant, will take that pollen to the other plant. So flowers are there to attract pollinators, not to attract us. It's just our good fortune that plants develop this system of attracting pollinators. So there's certain things to know about bees that will help with our conservation of public lands, and specifically help in our discussions in relation to grazing. One is, almost all bees are solitary. One female mated when she emerges in the spring or summer, and her job is to gather pollen and nectar, establish a nest, put the pollen and nectar in, lay an egg, go get more pollen and nectar, lay an egg, and do that for her brief life. The only native bees we have that are solitary basically are your bumblebees, which is one queen that was mated last fall and overwintered the winter, emerges, gathers pollen and nectar, makes a nest, generates some workers that way, and then quits for the season in terms of flying and just lays eggs and tends the larva. All the other bees are solitary. And then, of course, bees depend on that pollen. That's got to be there. That's their food. They're vegetarian. Wasps are carnivorous. Bees are vegetarian, and they live on pollen and nectar. So they have to have the flowers. And many are really tiny. They're difficult to identify. They're difficult to know their population size. They're difficult to know the degree to which they're declining and reaching critical levels before extinction. And then any given species of these solitary bees only lives 3 to 8 weeks. So even trying to study them and learn their population, they're only like early spring or they're later spring or they're summer or whatever. They're just a small, the solitary bees you're seeing right now, they won't be there in a few weeks. All of this I'll relate to conservation. And most, about 75% nest in the ground. A lot of us love to have bee houses for those bee species that tend to, that will drill their nests in wood and so on. But really, most of our bees, almost all our bees, are ground nesters. And sometimes they nest near each other, but still, it's each female her own nest in that group. And then, really important, about 25 to 30% are picky eaters. They only go to a particular genus or sometimes only a particular species. And again, this is going to be critical for conservation because, let's see, it's not moving to the next one. Nobody? There. So here's a picture of each yellow square there is a different bee species in California. There's about 1,575 native solitary bee species in California. Only 25 are bumblebee species. They get a lot of the, that's what people are familiar with, kind of feel friendly to. And then there's just one non-native European honeybee, and that's causing a lot of trouble for the 1,500 or the 1,600 bees when they're there among them. In terms of conservation, bumblebees are your charismatic bee. They're big, you can see them. Perdita bees are like teeny. They're fuzzy, so they're kind of like, a teddy bear. They're slow, so you get to watch where they're visiting and where they're going next. They're noisy, so you can hear them going around. They're non-threatening. They're kind of, I guess if you squished them, they might sting, but they're not, basically, they're not going to go after you. They're social, and so their colony lasts an entire season. Once the female comes out, the queen comes out, having been mated the last fall, sets up her colony. She builds it during the summer with the workers. Toward the end of the summer, the workers feed different food to the different eggs and they get some males and some what will be queens. They emerge late in the season. The male mates with a queen. She goes and finds a nest, not a nest, but a place to hide for the winter, and the colony is gone. That's really different than the honeybee, which in those hives lives year after year. So all these characteristics of bumblebees lead to some public lands opportunities for us. For instance, each bumblebee species, which are getting to be more well-known, requires a diversity of flowers throughout the season. So this idea of changing the pasture rotation, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if their flowers are taken by the cattle consumption at the start of the season, that's problematic. If the cattle are there in the middle of the season, that's a problem. If the cattle are there in the fall, that's a problem. So bumblebees demand a diversity of flower species. And when that flower species diversity is there, then there are going to be flowers that support those solitary bees and even the picky eater bees. We know the locations and trends for more bumblebees than for other bees, and particularly due to Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation, because they have got a whole bunch of fans of bumblebees fanning the western states in particular, but also back east, with a very formal protocol of doing a survey for a certain amount of time, capturing the bumblebee, putting it in ice at least for 20 minutes, then it's knocked out, and you can get a picture of the side and the front and the top, and enter that in, and boom, they can identify that bumblebee, and they have a good record for its presence. And this is important for us to be able to say, you've got X, you've got some western bumblebee, which is in trouble, and we know that it's in your ranger district. Agencies are aware, just like the public is, that bees are declining. Now, it started, of course, with Save the Bees, with the honeybees, which can get really knocked back by pesticides and disease because they're all crowded so much. But they get reestablished every winter, over the winter. They're a managed bee. They're a livestock. They're not in trouble. The native bees are in trouble. So to the degree that an agency person is aware of Save the Bees, is aware that bees are declining globally, that helps us, because they don't know what species they have. They don't know, understandably they don't. It's very hard to know. They don't know how much it's declining, how much they're declining, but they know they're in trouble. And they're in trouble globally. They're in trouble with the world heating up. It's getting too hot for bumblebees, lots of places. They're in trouble because of loss of habitat to agriculture and housing. They're in trouble because not so much on the public lands with pesticides, but they're in trouble anywhere else. And, it was mentioned the potential to require BLM to sell off lands in Nevada and Utah. That's the kind of habitat loss that they keep facing. And so one more thought about characteristics of bees that we can use in defending the public lands is bumblebees. They're big, they're easier to identify, there's not so many of them, And they're the ones more likely to get endangered species, a threatened and sensitive status. So for instance, there are 4 bumblebees that are candidates for California's Endangered Species Act. And western bumblebee is a species of conservation concern in Utah. And so this is an important, actually, aspect of California, given the threats to ESA federally. California has its own ESA and its own state NEPA, CEQA. So this effort to stop permitting of honeybee apiaries on federal land, BLM Forest Service lands, this effort to have pay attention to what grazing is doing to reduction of flower heads, or even more drastically, the flower species themselves, will go on. So flowers, as mentioned earlier today, are the top of a plant. That's what cows and other ungulates are going to go for first. That's the most vulnerable part of the plant. Also, as mentioned, 75% of bees nest underground, and cattle are known to trample bee nests underground. And then, most importantly, is their depletion of flower diversity. You don't have bees without flowers, and you don't have flowers without bees. So it's a way to appeal to the public. They come and care. We all care about seeing diversity of flowers, and more people are learning to care about bees. There's a lot of effort of people planting native plant species in their garden because they've become aware of bees. They're becoming more aware of bees on public lands. And I would say a lot of federal agency managers are concerned about it, are aware of it too. There's not great law or legal handles on that. It's more of a personal, it's more of a sense, oh, I've got these unknown number of bees on my land under my management watch, and it's pretty clear they need flowers, and they need to be free of pesticides, they need to be free of honeybee apiaries, which are groups of honeybee hives. And honeybees really are livestock. In this picture, there's a bee and the other bees in the air, and some down below, you can barely see it, but there's hives. And these hives, individual box, we've all seen the white boxes. Those start the season, an individual box with 10,000 bees. Builds up in the season to 30,000. They're stacked to a stand. Their permit is often 4 apiaries, each with 100 hives. I mean, it's millions of honeybees against these solitary bees that have such a short life. Vince Tepedino and Jim Kane did the work of looking at how many pollen grains a honeybee brings back to the hive, how many trips they make, how many bees took an average size hive, and they figure, and then they looked at how many pollen grains an average size native bee needs to raise a young. And this is a chart that's a little hard to read, but say you take green and you say those are 90 hives. Now remember, up in northern Utah, there's a permit for 800 hives. 90 hives that are 4 months on the land would raise, so 4 months, you see the 4 down on the x-axis and go over to the y-axis, take enough pollen that could raise about 12 million solitary native bees. So it's really overwhelming. It's very much, they graze pollen just like cattle and sheep graze the grasses and forbs. So it really is a significant issue. Recently, we got a EIS done on 6 grazing allotments on Monroe Mountain, and the EIS had 5 significant issues, and they made one of them pollination and did some surveys of how much what diversity of flowers was present in various areas on the allotment. So if it's raised as a wildlife issue, it can take place. I mean, it can be significant. And so the take home, that all bees matter, and they're really, really interesting. This is a nice green metallic bee. I don't know if any of you have seen them, but once you start looking at bees, it's a whole world of wildlife that we haven't really usually paid so much attention to. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Okay, our next 2 speakers are actually joining us virtually. First, we're going to have Brian Miller. Brian Miller is a conservation biologist with a PhD from the University of Wyoming, where he helped capture the last wild black-footed ferrets for a groundbreaking captive breeding program. His career spans reintroduction efforts in the US and Mexico, jaguar and